Welcome to Life Stories. What would you do if a single decision, one moment of speaking out, put everything you've worked for at risk? Imagine being targeted by someone in power, someone who holds your fate in their hands, simply because you dared to question their authority. What if that person wasn't just any politician, but someone who could ruin your career, your life, all for the sake of protecting their own ego? This is the story of Lena Roberts, a high school teacher who found herself caught in a battle, not just for her job, but for the very idea of justice. But what happens when the law itself becomes a weapon used to crush those who challenge the system? Stay with us and witness how Lena's courage and her fight for what's right could change everything. Now, let's dive into the heart of the story. Lena Roberts stood at the front of her classroom, the soft hum of the school bell ringing in the distance as her students packed up for lunch. She smiled faintly as Jeremy, one of her more outspoken students, raised his hand. Why do we need to analyze symbolism? Can't we just enjoy the story? Lena's heart warmed, the familiar question pulling her back into the passion that had first led her to literature. That's actually a profound question, Jeremy, she replied, setting down her marker. Literature isn't just entertainment. It's a reflection of justice, truth, and human experience. The deeper you look, the more you understand, not just the story, but the world around you. Her students, some engaged and others already distracted by the thought of lunch, seemed to take in her words with varying degrees of attention. But Lena was lost in her thoughts, not at all bothered by the classroom distractions. For 10 years, this had been her world, teaching, guiding young minds through the lessons of literature, life, and the subtle intricacies of justice. It was the rhythm she had found, the purpose she was born to embrace. Yet lately, something had shifted inside her, something she couldn't shake. The school newspaper sat on the corner of her desk, a headline glaring at her: "Local judge's controversial decision diverts school funds." Lena's chest tightened as she read the words. She had spoken out at the town hall just a month ago, criticizing the very decision that now threatened the education system she cared so deeply about. Judge William Carter, the man responsible for the ruling, had made a choice that, though legal, felt morally wrong to Lena. The funds, promised to the school district for educational improvements, had been rerouted to a private development project, leaving her students and their futures in limbo. In the teacher's lounge that afternoon, Lena's colleague Diane nudged her playfully. "I heard you made quite the impact at that town hall, Lena. Stirred up some important feathers, huh?" Lena sighed, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. "I just spoke the truth, Diane," she said, glancing at the floor. "I'm a teacher, not a politician. What's he gonna do, sue me for speaking my mind?" Diane's expression turned serious. "You're playing with fire, Lena. Pierce has friends everywhere. You've got to be careful. You may not like him, but he's got the power to make life difficult for you." But Lena didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt alive, truly alive. She wasn't just teaching. She was standing up for something she believed in, something far bigger than herself. That evening, as she sat down to grade papers in her modest apartment, a strange feeling gripped her. The answering machine blinked red. "Lena Roberts, this is the clerk from the municipal court. You are being summoned regarding your traffic violation from last month. Judge Carter will be presiding. Please appear this Friday at 9 a.m. Lena froze. She had received a minor ticket weeks ago, a rolling stop, nothing more. She had paid the fine immediately online. So why was she being summoned to court? She felt a knot twist in her stomach. As her thoughts raced, she couldn't shake the feeling that Judge Carter was somehow involved in this. But how? The next day, Lena found herself pacing in her apartment, going through her grandfather's old law books, his case files from his years as a small-town attorney. Lena had always admired him, the way he fought for justice, the way he used his knowledge of the law to protect the vulnerable. She had chosen teaching over a career in law, believing it was her way to make a difference, to impact the next generation. But now she realized she might have to step back into that world, back into a courtroom she had long avoided. Lena did what any law-abiding citizen would do in a moment like this. She researched. The more she dug, the more she realized that Judge Carter was far from the honorable figure he portrayed himself to be. He had a history, one of quiet manipulation, power plays, and using the judicial system to settle personal scores. People who had opposed him publicly or criticized his rulings had mysteriously found themselves caught in legal troubles. Minor infractions turned into long, drawn-out court cases. It wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern. Lena wasn't just being targeted because of her traffic ticket. She was being punished for speaking out, challenging the system, challenging him. And he was making an example of her. But Lena had something he didn't. She wasn't going down without a fight. As the days passed, she transformed from a teacher into a student of the law once again. She spent every free moment poring over legal textbooks, court records, case histories. She wasn't just preparing to defend herself against fabricated charges. She was preparing to expose Judge Carter for what he really was. A man who had let power corrupt him. A man who thought he could silence anyone who dared to speak the truth. By the time she stepped into the courtroom, Lena was no longer just the unassuming teacher. She was a force armed with facts, evidence, and the courage to stand up to someone who had abused his position of authority. The tension in the air was palpable as she walked to the defendant's table, feeling all eyes on her. Judge Carter barely looked up from his papers as he began, his voice condescending, his power unchallenged. "You're charged with failure to appear for a scheduled hearing regarding a traffic violation, Miss Roberts. How do you plead?" Lena's heart didn't race. Instead, a calm, steady confidence flooded her. "Not guilty, Your Honor, and I believe there's been a misunderstanding." But her words were only the beginning. As she proceeded, she pointed out the irregularities, the procedural errors that had been swept under the rug. She wasn't just defending herself. She was holding up a mirror to the very system that had tried to break her. The judge's expression darkened, his power slipping through his fingers as Lena meticulously dismantled his case. The courtroom fell silent. Even the clerk, Gerald, couldn't hide his discomfort. Lena was not the meek teacher he expected to see. She was a woman who had spent years learning to fight for what was right, and now she was making sure everyone knew just how far the corruption went. As Lena stood tall, delivering the final blow, the twist hit her. The judge, once confident and untouchable, was now visibly rattled. His pride, his ego, his entire career, all of it was crumbling before him, thanks to one woman's unwavering belief in justice. What would you do if you knew you were up against someone who had the power to ruin you but couldn't silence your voice? Is it worth risking everything for the truth, even if it costs you your career, your reputation, or your peace of mind? The judge had underestimated Lena, and now, as the courtroom held its breath, she realized one thing. This wasn't just about a traffic violation anymore. It was about justice, and it was about to be served in the most unexpected way. Will Lena's fight against corruption end with victory, or will it be the beginning of an even greater battle? Find out in the next chapter of The Reckoning. Lena sat in the back row of the courtroom, the air thick with tension. She could feel the eyes of the spectators on her, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. The judge, William Carter, sat at his elevated desk, his face a mask of controlled authority. He had tried to dismiss her arguments earlier, with sneers and dismissive gestures, but Lena had pushed forward, her calm voice cutting through his intimidation like a knife. She had asked for his recusal, citing the obvious conflict of interest between her public criticisms and his personal vendetta. Her mind, sharp and clear, had pulled out every possible procedural error, every flaw in his case. She had even gathered evidence of other individuals, lawyers, journalists, citizens, who had found themselves suddenly facing contempt charges after challenging his decisions. The room had gone quiet when she had finished, the murmurs of disbelief rippling through the gallery. It wasn't just the judge she was up against anymore. It was the entire system that had been built to protect men like him, powerful, untouchable, and corrupt. But as Lena watched Judge Carter squirm behind his polished desk, something inside her shifted. This wasn't just a courtroom battle anymore. This was a personal war. The guilt that had been simmering beneath the surface, something she hadn't fully acknowledged, started to seep through. She had wanted to change things, to make a difference, but at what cost? She had already seen the looks in the eyes of her colleagues, Diane's warning, Principal Stevens' hesitance. Was she doing the right thing? Was she becoming too consumed by this fight, too blinded by her desire for justice? The moment the judge dismissed the courtroom for a short recess, Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Diane. I don't know how much longer I can keep this from the superintendent. They're asking about you. What's going on? Lena's heart sank as she read the words. It wasn't just her job at risk anymore. It was the life she had built, the respect she had earned over years of teaching, the trust of her students, the reputation she had worked so hard to maintain. She stepped outside into the hallway, taking a deep breath. The hallway was quiet, save for the distant murmur of conversations from the waiting room. She ran her hand through her blonde hair, trying to steady her nerves, but it was as if every part of her body was shaking with the weight of the decision she had made. Miss Roberts? A voice called behind her, breaking her reverie. She turned to see Gerald, the clerk, his face pale. He was the same man who had handed her the file when she first entered the courtroom, the one who had avoided eye contact when the judge's orders had seemed off. He was standing in the doorway, shifting from foot to foot like someone who was about to deliver a message they didn't want to. Lena raised an eyebrow, her patience thin. What is it, Gerald? I just wanted to warn you, he began, his voice low. The judge? He's not going to take kindly to this. I've seen it happen before. People like him, they don't lose gracefully. And now that you've got the press involved, it's only going to get worse. Lena felt a cold wave of realization sweep over her. The man she had been trying to expose wasn't going to just walk away. Not quietly, not when his power was on the line. He would fight back. And as much as she hated to admit it, Lena wasn't sure she was prepared for what came next. Thanks for the warning, she said, though her voice didn't sound like her own. It felt distant, as if it was coming from someone else. She wasn't sure whether it was the fear or the fatigue settling in, but she suddenly felt small, trapped inside this cage of legalities and power games. Be careful, Miss Roberts. This is bigger than you think, Gerald added, his voice barely a whisper before he disappeared back into the courtroom. Lena stood there for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts, but the weight of the situation felt unbearable. She had hoped for a clean victory, a quick resolution where truth and justice would prevail. But now, she was beginning to see the cracks in the system. She had no doubt that she had right on her side, but right wasn't always enough when the forces against you were so powerful. The truth was, she wasn't just fighting Judge Carter. She was fighting a system that had allowed him to rise unchecked, a system that would rather silence her than admit that someone had been wronged. She thought about her grandfather, the quiet attorney who had taught her everything she knew about the law. He had always said that justice was not something you could force. It was something you had to fight for, no matter the cost. But what was the cost now? A figure appeared at the end of the hallway, breaking her thoughts. It was Mark Chen, her former student, now an investigative journalist. He had been digging into Judge Carter's past, gathering the evidence she needed to expose the judge's corruption. As he approached, Lena felt a renewed sense of urgency. I've got something, Mark said, his voice hurried. He handed her a thick envelope. I found more records, cases that have been buried, people who fought back before. Lena tore open the envelope, scanning the pages as Mark continued speaking. Her eyes widened with shock. These weren't just legal cases. They were personal vendettas, patterns of harassment, all directed at people who had dared to question the judge. The more she read, the more she realized the extent of the web of corruption she was facing. This wasn't just one isolated incident. It was systemic, carefully orchestrated. These people, they were trying to bring him down too, weren't they? Lena whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. Mark nodded grimly. And they failed. But you're different, Lena. You've got the public on your side now. You've got the press. You've got the truth. Lena's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had been wronged by this man, by this system. The weight of it all threatened to crush her. But something else began to rise within her too. A quiet, steady determination. She would expose the truth, no matter the cost. Have you ever found yourself fighting a battle you weren't sure you could win, but knew you had to? How far would you go to expose the truth, even if it meant risking everything? The courtroom doors swung open again, and Lena stepped forward, her resolve hardening. Whatever came next, she wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Lena stood in the courtroom once more, her eyes fixed on the judge, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders like an unshakable burden. Judge Carter sat before her, his face now devoid of the arrogance that had marked their previous exchanges. Instead, his features were taut, his eyes betraying the first signs of vulnerability. This was the moment Lena had been preparing for. Everything she had learned, everything she had endured, had led to this confrontation. She had fought against the oppressive power of a corrupt man who thought he could silence her with fabricated charges. But here, in the midst of this courtroom, Lena felt a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't just about winning. It wasn't even just about exposing Judge Carter. It was about something much deeper. It was about justice, real, untarnished justice, the kind her grandfather had fought for when he was still alive. She had stood on the precipice of her career, her life in turmoil, and yet here she was, ready to confront the very institution that had tried to crush her. It wasn't a victory she had wanted. It wasn't a win she had expected. It was something much more profound, a personal redemption, a reclaiming of her voice, of her truth. Miss Roberts, Judge Carter's voice cut through the heavy silence. He paused, his gaze flickering between the documents on his desk and Lena, clearly trying to regain some semblance of control. But there was no control left. Not for him. Not anymore. "You've made your case," he said, his words cold, deliberate, but there was something else in his tone, a crack, a hesitation. "But you must understand, this isn't just about a traffic ticket. This is about authority, about respect." Lena stood taller, her heart steady despite the storm swirling inside her. "Respect, Your Honor, is something that must be earned. It cannot be demanded through manipulation and deceit." There it was, the final push. She had seen through his facade, had uncovered the corruption that lay beneath his gavel, and now she was ready to expose it all. Judge Carter's fingers twitched as he reached for the gavel. But before he could strike it, Lena spoke again, her voice unwavering. "You know, Your Honor," she began, her words deliberate, "what I've learned through this whole ordeal is that the law isn't just about enforcing rules. It's about protecting people, those who can't protect themselves. It's about justice, true justice. And what I'm asking of you today is not a favor. It's a request for accountability, a request for you to step aside because you've clearly lost the capacity to judge fairly." The room was still, the breath of the entire courtroom caught in a collective exhale. Judge Carter's face flushed a deep crimson. His pride, once so insurmountable, now seemed fragile. The power he had once wielded like a weapon was slipping through his fingers, and Lena could see the change in him. He was no longer the untouchable figure he had once been. He was a man cornered by the truth, by his own misdeeds. In that moment, Lena realized something that shook her to her core. This wasn't just about her. This was bigger than her. This was a fight for everyone who had ever felt small in the face of power. It was for every person who had been silenced, ignored, or made to feel insignificant. "Miss Roberts," Judge Carter's voice cracked, the gavel still suspended in his hand. "This court finds you." "I move for your recusal, Your Honor," Lena interrupted, her voice calm, controlled. "And I request that all charges against me be dismissed with prejudice. There are too many inconsistencies here, too many unanswered questions about your actions. I've documented the irregularities in this case, and I'll take them all the way to the Judicial Conduct Committee if I have to." For the first time, Judge Carter didn't respond immediately. He stared at Lena, his gaze almost unreadable, but there was a shift in his posture. The weight of the situation was crushing him now. He was no longer the one holding the power. She was. The gallery, once full of whispers and murmurs, was silent now, every person in the room fully aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The tension in the room was palpable, but there was something else, something more profound, a sense of collective anticipation. People were waiting for him to make the move that would decide not just Lena's fate, but the fate of all those who had been wronged by the system. A long pause passed before Judge Carter finally spoke. "Very well, Miss Roberts," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your request is granted. The charges are dismissed, and I recuse myself from any future matters involving you." Lena stood frozen for a moment, the words washing over her in a rush of disbelief. She had won. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked, ignored, or oppressed. The weight of the moment hit her all at once, and she let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. As she walked out of the courtroom, the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed brighter, warmer. She had won, but it was more than that. She had reclaimed her dignity, her voice, her sense of self-worth. She had stood up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Mark, her former student turned investigative journalist. "It's over. He's done. You did it." Lena smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of peace, of understanding. She had fought this battle for justice, but in the end, it had been about something more. It had been about standing up for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against her. Later that day, Principal Stevens called her into his office. His face was somber, but there was something else in his eyes. Respect. "Lena," he began, "I owe you an apology. I didn't realize the depth of what you were up against. You've shown all of us what it means to stand for something, no matter the cost." Lena nodded, the weight of the entire experience still sitting heavily in her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about standing together and demanding better, not just for ourselves, but for the people who come after us." As she left the school, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the campus, Lena felt a quiet satisfaction wash over her. She had faced her demons and had come out the other side stronger. But more than that, she had reminded herself, and everyone around her, that justice, real justice, was worth fighting for. What would you risk to stand up for what's right, even if it meant facing the most powerful people in your life? Do you think the justice system is truly just, or do you think power sometimes has the final say? If you enjoyed Lena's story and want to see more, comment 100 below and share your thoughts. Where are you watching from today? Don't forget to share this story with your friends, and thank you for watching Life Stories.